So let's go to the next one, Jim. So we had this written down. We've been doing regular group updates, but they always get something else tacked in the end. And this one science and religion. Now, anyone who follows you or who has seen your content online is all aware of biohistory. And biohistory, you worked on. You can download that from the website, all that sort of stuff as well. Now, one of the questions I had for you, which a topic I thought we'd sort of discuss, would be the whole religion and science type of thing. And I know people say you shouldn't talk about religion, whatever, but I think it's because it's such a big part of your life, and I just love to know how it sits with you, because you got your science and you got your research on one side and biohistory, and then you have your religious, your religious faith and all the beliefs on sitting on the other side. I don't know. Do you think they're compatible, or what's your thoughts on all that?
Well, your idea that they're on different sides is somewhat strange. I'd see them as very much part of the same thing. Look, for a start, I believe the Bible is the Word of God, and it's the best guide to life. But I don't take Genesis literally.
I would hope not.
Obviously,
some people do.
There are a powerful number of reasons for thinking the world wasn't made 6,500 years ago, and also that you couldn't fit all the species into world Noah's Ark, which is even more improbable if you think about it.
So have you seen the Ken Ham thing in America? Ken Ham recreated the life-size Noah's Ark. Have you seen this? He's from Queensland. He's a nut. I think he's a nut. But if you go to YouTube, Ken Ham, he recreated the whole thing. It's a whole museum, got government money and everything like that. All private donations, and he replicated the whole thing and tried to put every species. It's quite. I have to send you the link on YouTube to have a look.
Look, I'm a Bible-believing Christian, but I certainly don't believe that Genesis was meant as a scientific account. It's a theological account. It's a statement that God is the creator of the universe, which of course I believe in. Now, I happen to believe the world was created 13.7 billion years ago, or the universe was. At least this universe.
That's good, yeah.
So
at least this universe. So you like multiverse?
Yeah, why not?
Yeah.
The whole idea of the universe could have come from a black hole from another universe.
Yeah, or bubble universe.
Correct. Bray universe. Then you've got the multi-universe where every time you get a quantum change, then you get a different universe appearing. There's some fascinating ideas.
Yeah, that's a great. But how do you reconcile that with your belief? I don't understand that part. What you just said, because I'm glad to hear. Because multiverse theory, I recommend if you don't know about it, YouTube, there's a lot of interesting stuff. So how do you reconcile that with your belief that someone outside of that is in control or did that? That's what I don't understand. There's no evidence to lead to that, in my opinion.
I don't see why there's a contradiction.
But yes, so that sort of stuff with multiverse theory and say cosmology, which can provide evidence to say, well, this is the evidence that we think this is happening, and this is the hypothesis, we're going to test it, this is the evidence, and that's the way the case is. I don't see how you can do that with the argument for a God or for an omnipotent.
No, obviously you can't.
So I don't understand
how... you can't... God isn't like a scientific empirical test that you can actually sit down and figure it out by science. It doesn't work that way. But I don't see that... It's not the same kind of thing anyway. I mean... I don't know what's a comparison. I love my wife. Okay, that's a personal feeling. It doesn't necessarily mean it could be empirically verified or justified, except the fact that I hug her a lot and so forth.
There's some evidence. There's some observational evidence with that.
That's what I mean. But you're right too. Yeah. And to me, there's observational evidence of God, but it doesn't mean you can sit down and do a scientific rigid experiment to prove that I love my wife, although God exists. Sometimes you just got to go by observation and the best you can do. And some things are very suited to that, like physics and so forth, chemistry and stuff, and some are not very well suited. But I don't think they're in contradiction. They're just very different things, that's all. Well,
I would say they are in contradiction. I follow a lot of stuff, Christopher Hitchens, Lawrence Krauss, that sort of stuff, and there's a lot of the debates which are done worldwide with that. And this is the question. Is science compatible with religion? And the religious people always say yes, it is, and the other scientists will say no, it's not.
But the problem is too what you mean by religion. If you're talking about literal creationism, the world was created 6,500 years ago in Noah's Ark. That's directly contrary to a heap of empirical evidence. That's pretty clear to me. The church I go to, they tend to be fundamentalists, and I sit and listen to the sermons. I was going to send up a what we call a white card to the preacher the other Sunday, one of the last ones before the crackdown, because he talked about that we're all descended from an Eve who lived 200,000 years ago. Well, that's completely wrong. We are descended from a mitochondrial Eve. In other words, all the female lineages of the human race can be traced back to somebody who lived about 200,000 years ago in Africa.
Yes.
So there's some things that you can say, people who...
But do you see there's a problem with what he said? Because if you've got young kids in there, this is my problem with it as well. You've got a young kid in there, a family, all right? They're going to a science class at school, and then they hear that from someone. Who are they supposed to believe. This is the problem I have it as well. It's something what you just said then. I was a young kid. I'll make a statement. I used to be a Roman Catholic, and I was a big Roman Catholic because of my mum. Irish Catholic, Irish background. And and I would believe what my parents said or my mum said, right? So that if I had someone come and say the other thing, it sort of crushed, it's very hard as a young person to say, well, what is right? And when you hear that.
Well, of course, my family is a bit different because even though we go to a Creationist church and a Creationist school attached to the church, they've got a very uncreationist father, at least in that literal sense.
And this is what I'm finding hard to reconcile because what you said.
So my daughters quite early in their school career tend to be the evolutionists in the class, and they're actually asking questions of the teacher and objecting to things because they get it from me,
which is great. Now, in the class, what do they teach in the class? Because that's great to hear.
I think they've actually started to teach evolution a bit now, which is a bit annoying.
They've just started to teach it.
Evolution is a very, it's a beautiful theory.
Absolutely. Charles Darwin all the way, absolutely.
But you're right, most Christians these days aren't literal fundamentalists. I mean, the Pope would accept that the creation was, a bit further back than 6,500 years.
I would hope not. But can you see I'll go back to that point. Can you see the problem with that being said?
Yes, I can, but I can also see so many problems the other way. Look, there's two sides to. First of all, why do we go to a Creationist church? That's a good question. The reason that we do actually is because when people who hold the hard line on teachings in Genesis, they also tend to hold a hard line on other teachings which are actually far more important. And I'm thinking about beliefs that sex should be confined to marriage, which I fervently believe in. Okay, and it's not only that I believe in it personally, but all my studies have shown that kind of morality is enormously beneficial to well-being. For example, if you look at Alfred Kinsey, now he's not a Christian apologist by any means, quite the opposite. But you look at his studies that were done back in the 40s, showing that the teenagers who didn't indulge in sexual activity were far, far more likely to be successful in life. They had better education, they had they made more money and so forth. There's an effect on character which is very long-lasting if you follow Christian teachings. So what I'm saying is, do I choose a church that has very liberal attitudes toward creationism, but also is pretty wishy-washy about things like premarital sex and drugs and smoking and excessive drinking, all those kind of things, very liberal and open-minded and stuff? Or do I choose a church which has very fundamentalist views on Scripture, but at the same time is much stronger on all these incredibly important behavioural sides? Well, I choose that because overall, my kids will work it out for themselves. They're all evolutionists anyway, no matter what but the moral teachings of the church are very, very strong in my kids. And on the whole, they've turned out very well. I think largely because of that. So what's important? So
you like the hard line, moral. The one you get the hard line moral for that stance, and you like that. And I'm in trouble from what you said based on that study. I'm in big trouble, I think.
And I think that's your problem. In a sense, it's not so much. See, Christianity is two things, okay? First of all, Christianity is it's an ethical lifeline. It's ethics, it's behaviour, it's the way you live. Now, empirically speaking, Christian values actually work out incredibly well. And they've all kinds of scientific studies to show that if you do the things that Christians say you should do, you'll live a better life. For example, you have stronger families, you have less divorce, you're less likely to be depressed, you're all kinds of things. Your children are going to turn out better, you're more likely to have better health, you've got better social bonds. There are heaps and heaps. You'll live longer. There's masses and masses of studies to show that living Christian style values are good for you. There's also the other side, which is the faith side. You could believe in all your Christian ethics, but you don't believe in God. Couple of problems with that. First of all, because without God, those things tend to become weaker and they tend to be watered down. It's like the loose leaf Bible. I'll accept this, but not that. This one's good. Nah, not these two.
But that's what a lot of religious people tend to do, though.
They do, yes.
Buffet style religion. They go, oh, I like this, but I'm going to chuck this one out because that's silly.
And that's the problem with liberal churches that basically says, well, what do people think? Let's run and try and adapt to what most people think.
Which is like a Hillsong type of thing, I would presume, maybe, or not?
No, Hillsong's better than that.
Right.
I wouldn't put that in that. My Jasmine goes to Hillsong. It's a great church. But there are churches that are very, very wishy-washy and liberal, and the ones that tend to be declining, by the way, the ones that are growing or holding their own tend to be much more firm on those kinds of values because the values change life. So I said, one of the problems with leaving God out of the picture is that you take away the backbone, you take away the strength behind it. You don't have that divine sanction. And the other thing too is that from an experiential point of view, putting God in the picture seems to work. And it's not just a matter of a good lifestyle. It's that God does seem to be there. You do things like you pay tithing and certain things work out. You act in a way that you'd think have no sense financially, economically, but somehow turn out to be amazingly good. I see so much evidence of God's power in the world in the way my life has progressed.
I just don't. Well, why do you have to use that word God? Why does it have to be a God? Why can't it just be statistical coincidence or just something that you go, I don't know what it is, but why do you have to label? Like, why does it have to be a label and then that be?
Well, it's not a label. To me, God's a person. So, as a friend of mine once said, people say it's a coincidence because he spent a lot of time. He worked at the university, spent a lot of time talking with atheists and people you get on with very well. And he said, well, maybe when I pray it's a coincidence and something happens, it's a coincidence. But when I pray, coincidences happen, and when I don't, they don't.
Yeah, I don't know, Jim. I just think there's a lot of. I just find it very hard. Like what you said before, we agree on a lot of things in regards to the age of the universe and potential for a multiverse theory, all this sort of stuff we agree on. But the answer for me is how did that come about? I don't know. I'd like to know how that came about. But I'd say I don't know. I don't think the human brain is designed to ever really comprehend the level that we're going to need to know to truly understand the naturalistic origins fully of a universe or multiverse.
One of the problems, we know all about the way the universe and how physics works and how atoms work. You know more about that every day. It's incredible advances. But what we don't know is how to live a good and satisfying life. The problems with mental illness, for example, are horrifying, and the problems of violence and of family abuse and child abuse and domestic violence and crime and alcoholism and drug abuse and all these kinds of issues. There are so many incredibly powerful things. We may theoretically understand something about them, but in practice, we deal with them very, very poorly. Religion is far better at those kinds of areas. It gives better answers, statistically speaking, better answers than all the scientific theories there can be.
What about the story of Jesus? Do you believe that? That's for me. Do you believe the story of Jesus?
Yes, of course I do.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely I do.
Right.
I mean, Jesus is the foundation, the rock. I'd say of all the scripture, the synoptic gospels is my absolute favourite part. I love those stories, and I live by those stories.
But do you find it, because it's very similar to the story of Horus from Egyptian mythology? It is.
Yes, right.
Absolutely it is. So this is what I'm saying. A lot of the stories that have been told are very similar to each other, and they've predated it by a long way as well.
In the Roman Empire, you also have a lot of cults that deal with the dying god too, the cult of Isis and Osiris and so forth. Yes, there's similarities. But Jesus was a fairly unusual figure in the sense, but he came out of Jewish belief too, which is very different.
Yep.
Jewish ideas of God are very different from pre-existing ideas from other cultures, like the Egyptians. The view of things like your obligation to the less fortunate. There's I don't know if I've told you this, but the Emperor Julian, do you know it's called Julian the Apostate?
No, I wouldn't know this. No.
And he was aiming to bring back paganism, because there'd been some Christian emperors and he'd been brought up as a Christian, but he gave it up. So he became an emperor. He said, no, I want to bring back paganism. And so he said, he went to the priests of Cybele, which is a sort of a cult that was in the Eastern Empire at that time. And he said, you guys are just hopeless. You've forgotten to give all the charity and stuff and looking after the poor and the homeless and the weak. And you've done that. And these Christians are running away with you because they're doing this stuff and you're not. You've forgotten it. But the problem was they never had. It was never part of Cybele. It was never part of religion. But he'd been so indoctrinated by Christian ideas about charity and help for the poor and compassion and those kind of things that he wasn't aware how fundamentally amoral paganism was. And this is the Jewish God. This is the idea of the Jewish God as a profoundly ethical being and a concern for the less fortunate was very, very distinctive. And people often have a go at Christianity, but one of the things the Romans used to love, if you were a Roman, your favourite thing to do was to go down to the Colosseum or to whatever place locally, and you'd see people being ripped apart by wild beasts and killing each other. These are slaves, they had no choice. And this is brutality, and you'd be yelling, yeah, fantastic, go on, stick the knife in. That was how you used to enjoy things as a Roman. That was their culture. And then the Christians came along and said, this is wrong. And you know what? The Christian emperor stopped it. Very soon after Christianity became official, they said, no more. God does not like this kind of stuff. It's a fundamentally different idea of who God is and what the deity is like to what existed in the world to that stage.
My question then is, why does it need this thing called God? Why can't I just say it is wrong? In the name of humanism, or this is wrong to do this to fellow men. Why does it have to have the basis of God?
On what basis?
Well, why does God need to be the basis for it? There's no... Where's this coming from? A book, or from what stories told down from? This is the thing as well, with the story of Jesus as well.
But on what basis? That's the problem. If you look, we're talking about God in a practical sense here, but on what basis do you say it is wrong to kill people in the arena for fun? On what basis? What's your basis to your judgment? The Romans would have thought nothing
based
wrong
on
with
empathy
that.
and a human sense of empathy.
But they didn't have it. They thought it was wonderful.
Well, that's not all of them. That wouldn't have been all of them. That's a generalisation of the society at the time.
The great majority. The games were incredibly popular. If you were the emperor and you wanted to become popular, I'll give you an example. The Emperor Nero. Now, he's not the finest character of all, but one of the things he did early in his reign became very unpopular. He was very enamoured of Greek culture. He loved plays and he loved recitals and this kind of stuff too. So he said, the Romans, we don't want you to stop. We want you to stop doing these barbarous things. We'd like you to have Greek culture instead. You know what the Romans thought of that? No way. You are denying. He became so unpopular, he had to reverse himself. They loved that kind of stuff. So when you say it's natural human empathy, well, the Romans didn't think that. Nor did the Greeks think like that. It was a very Christian idea. See, your ideals are fundamentally Christian ideals that have persisted even in the absence of Christianity, even though you've lost Christianity. That's what humanism is. Humanism is not some independent, arbitrary way of thinking about it. Humanism is Christian values to a large extent, minus their theological underpinnings. And the trouble with that is that when you take God out of the picture, you get some problems. Like one of the people would say, how would you get an ideal society? Get all the force of science and stuff and take out all this Christian garbage and ethics, and let's have societies that are basically on materialistic scientific principles. And there was two great experiments that were done in the 20th century where they tried exactly this. One of them was Nazi Germany and the other was Stalinist Russia.
No.
Both cultures came out of Christian thinking and they said, we reject God, we reject Christian thinking. How did that work out?
No, I disagree. I would say definitely not Stalin. You're not more qualified in history than me, but I'm taking this on, I'm repeating what people like Lawrence Krauss or Christopher Hitchens or Richard Dawkins to say. Stalin and Adolf Hitler did not do those things based on the atheistic beliefs or atheism.
No,
definitely not.
Didn't.
Right?
They didn't. Of course not.
Yeah. So it wouldn't have mattered.
They didn't.
Yes. But it wouldn't have mattered.
And the people in the Roman amphitheatres who used to scream and yell to, stick the spike in this guy, kill him. They weren't atheists either. It wasn't atheism, it was their human nature that did it. The trouble is when you take God away, when you take that profound ethical basis of our understanding of who God is and how he controls the world and what he wants from us and what he's designed us to be and what's going to happen after we die. You take that out, you leave the world open for the Stalins. It's not because they're atheists. They were basically power-hungry people. People with passions and power and a complete lack of empathy, apparently, for anybody else.
Well, people were decent.
It wasn't being atheists that did it,
Correct.
But God didn't stop them. And it was interesting how many of the people who fought against those, Hitler, for example, like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and so forth, were guided by Christian values. And those who protected the Jews from being killed, but did it because God wants them to do it, because that's their concept of God. So what you think about God matters a very great deal in practice. And you are not a mass murderer as far as I know, unless you've got hobbies that I don't know about. But the fact of the matter is when you take God out of the picture, you loosen the foundations. You've got this wonderful foundation of Christian ethics, which has been built up over 2,000 years with all this humanitarian service to the poor and don't kill people, all these kind of great ideas. And underneath that, there's God. And you take it out. It's like those games. You know those games where they play where you put the little blocks in this kind of thing? What's it called?
A Jenga or something, or what? Which one?
Jenga.
Sorry?
Yeah.
Jenga.
And you've got to take out block after block after block. Well, see, if you take out the bottom blocks, for a while it works. And after a while, the whole thing falls down.
Well, you're saying, so let's say humans, all right, 200,000 years they existed, and you're saying the last 2,000 years God's decided to come down and reveal himself. So you're saying for 198,000 years there wasn't decent pockets of society without some sort of...
Of course there were.
Yeah, so what's...
But if you were to read the history of the Roman Empire and try to tell me that things didn't change for the better...
That's one part of the world, though. I know the Roman Empire was the most significant part of one of the greatest empires ever. I understand that. That's one part of the world. We don't know other areas.
But it's interesting, though, too, in different parts of the world, very similar times, you started to develop a number of thinking and, largely God-inspired ideas. They had different ideas of who God was and so forth. But ethics and religion have actually been, it's relatively recent. Until about 3,000 years ago, there was never much of a sense that that the divinities had much to do with morality as such.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a recent argument. It's a definitely more recent argument.
But you also get the same kind of teaching. I mean, Islam, for example, has pretty strong ethical teachings. Muslims, pious Muslims, tend to be pretty good people if they follow the dictate of religion. For example, one of the pillars of Islam is charity.
Yeah,
that's a completely un-Roman idea, but it's very much fundamentally part of Islam.
Well, the loans.
Care for the less fortunate.
They have those loans. There's these certain loans which they take, which is 0% interest.
Yeah, that's against usury and so forth. But there's a very strong ethical basis in Islam, in Confucianism, for example, or in Hinduism. All these religions or Zoroastrianism, which was sort of preceded Christianity in the Near East. All these religions are increasingly ethical teachings coming in as time's gone by. Mm-hmm. Now, to what extent, God's behind that, but I think he's got something to do with it. But sometimes people need to progress to a certain state before they'll listen to him. It's not easy for God to get through, and people have very, very rigid hearts.
Yeah, I don't know, Jim. I just don't know, but I just find it hard to that I just don't buy that argument that there is something that sits outside of space and time, for example. I just don't see there's any real evidence for that argument. Because I take it very simply. It might be very simplistic in what I do, but this is the way I look at it very simply. Your argument is there's a God, and you're saying he as well, so it's a he, it's a male, sits outside of space and time, and everything that's in existence has been...
No. Yeah? If you're asking if God has male genitalia and
No, I'm just saying you said he, so I'm just using that, but it could be she, I know. I'm just saying...
It's just a way of thinking about it.
So this thing sits outside space and time, and it's beyond any reasoning, whatever, and then all this sort of stuff, right? But all this stuff here with the evidence and scientific process here, whereas I'm saying I don't buy that. There's no reason, there's no evidence, there's no logical reason that I believe or anything that's been presented for me in my life that can make that argument the case. My argument is I don't know. I don't know if that is the case. That could be true. It could not be.
Well, you're an
it could be something else.
As I was till the age of 27.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. For me, it seems to be more reasonable with what's at hand to be that position. The answer is I don't know.
But partly that is, Joel, because you've never been there. Now, you might have been brought up as a Catholic, but you were never a Christian in the sense of somebody who had that relationship with God. So you've never done it. All I can say is that I was in the same situation to you. And I wasn't much younger than you when I actually became a Christian. I was a very militant agnostic. I would have said exactly the same things. But what happened is, first of all, I could see something missing in my own life. There was something there that wasn't quite right. And then I got to know some people at the university who were in the Christian union at that stage, and they had something. There was something about them that I liked. They had something that I missed. There was an attitude. There was a sense of ethics, a sense of decency, the sense of happiness, of confidence, whatever. There was something very attractive. Got to know them, and then in that context, God spoke to me. And then when I took him at his word and said, "Okay, God, I'll follow you," my life changed in a way that was quite extraordinary. Now, that's not something that you can prove empirically. All I can say is that to me, it was like going from the desert to the promised land, from the stony desert to this beautiful garden full of waterfalls and trees and vegetation. It's an experience so wonderful. It's one of the two best things that ever happened to me in my whole life. The other one was meeting my wife, Lee. Mm-hmm. So it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. And when I took God at his word and did and acted as if, and I'm not saying there's never any doubts that come across my mind at any time in those decades since then, but when I take God at his word and do what I should do and act, things work out amazingly well. It's a lifetime experience. And fundamentally, people aren't Christians because they're convinced logically. You can argue blue in your face about the for and against God. I don't care about that sort of stuff. I don't think it's inconsistent. But it's not how you become a Christian. You become a Christian by taking that step in faith and finding something that's a lot better than you had in the past.
But when you say, so for me, hearing that, you say, God spoke to me. This is the thing I find it hard to reconcile, right? Because I've got a mum with mental illness. So if my mum said to me, God spoke to me, I'd go, I'm going to call the call the asylum and away you go. That's so you can see from my point of view when someone says that to me,
Yes,
in
of course.
traditional societal
But
standards.
that's what I'm
if you said
saying.
someone
That's
spoke
what I'm
to
saying
me,
to you, Joel. If you've never been there and you've done it and you've never tried it,
well, this is the problem. This is where we're always going to be never
of course not.
line it because
You will never,
because
unless
you take that as evidence, don't you? That's evidence
What?
for you. When someone spoke to you, you're saying that's the evidence for the existence of that.
Look, it wasn't actually words like back in my mind. I was writing in a book. I was just writing down my thoughts in a book, and in a bit of red pen, I can vividly remember it. And it's got this message, and it was in a sense it was the excuse I needed to cross over to the other side, because to make a commitment. Look, I don't know. Christianity is. I've told you about Blondin, haven't I?
No, I don't think you have.
Okay, the tightrope walker.
You haven't told me
heard
this,
the
no.
story. Okay,
No.
This to me is the essence of what Christianity is about for me. All right, Blondin was a tightrope walker. He used to do these major stunts. This is early in the last century, where he put this tightrope walker over Niagara Falls, which is a pretty dangerous place to go. Mm-hmm. So you fall instant death. There's no way you could survive. Now he used to walk across it. Okay, then he walked across blindfold, which when you know understanding about balance is a bit hard. Then he used to do other stunts. One of them, he actually had a little stove, and he took an omelette, put it in the middle of it, and he cooked an omelette and ate it on this stove. Another time, he put a lioness in a wheelbarrow and wheeled the lioness across this tightrope. Another time, he put his wife in the wheelbarrow and wheeled her across. Okay, and it's a story that one time somebody came up to him, and it was just saying how amazing he was. It was just on the next to this tightrope, and he said, "Look, that's incredible what you've done." And Blondin said, "Yeah, look, I see you said. Do you believe I can do it?" He said, "Yes, of course I believe. I've seen it." He said, "Do you believe that I could actually wheel somebody across in a wheelbarrow right across Niagara Falls?" He said, "Yes, of course I believe it." So Blondin said, "Okay, step in, get in the wheelbarrow." Now, the difference is this: believing in something is believing that it can happen, but having faith is getting in the wheelbarrow. And it's not a matter of having total confidence. It's a matter of making that commitment, as I did back in that time when I was 27 years old and said, "All right, God, I'm getting in the wheelbarrow. I'll give it a go. I'll see what happens." And when I did that, God became very real.
Now, do you think you would be in a different position in your life if you stayed with your agnostic
No.
views?
Absolutely not.
Right.
The Christianity is fundamental to Jim's, to what Jim's group is. The beliefs that we have of service to franchisees. I mean, Jesus washing his disciples' feet, that was a very radical, revolutionary idea. In those days, washing somebody's feet was something that was a sign of servility. And I mean being a slave, being a property. You'd wash somebody's feet. That's a degradation. There were some very, very revered teachers as a sign of ultimate loyalty. The disciples would wash their feet. That has been known, but very rare because it was such a humiliating thing. The night before Jesus was betrayed, he actually washed his own disciples' feet. That is revolutionary. There's nothing like that. Not even in Jewish history, not in any religion, that idea that we serve others in that way. And he chose that example. That particular idea is the fundamental idea behind Jim's group, that we don't serve Jim, we don't serve the franchisors, we serve the franchisees. That is the absolute fundamental. I say it again and again and again, all the time. It always comes out. Who's our priority? Franchisees are our priority. Customer service, yeah, about customers, but it's about getting more work from our franchisees. Everything we do is based on that. That is a fundamentally Christian idea. It turns things on their heads. Instead of saying it's Jim, franchisors, franchisees, no, franchisees are on top. That's Christian. And this whole idea, voting out franchisors. It's happened this morning. I've actually got a vote out going through where some of the franchisees have written to me and said, we're not happy with the franchisor, we want to vote him out. We're putting a process through. That is unique. That is all part of our values that say franchisees come first. That is a fundamentally Christian principle. And there's no one in the world that I would have achieved what I have if it hadn't been for those. Because actually, if you look at my book, so many of the best decisions that I ever made were decisions that I made against my immediate financial self-interest. And I said, no, God wants me to do this. And I did it. And wow, did that work out well?
I think, me personally, I think because you're a very, very, very intelligent person, I think no matter you would have succeeded no matter what it was. But I can understand what you're saying. So I'm just saying that I think you would have achieved without it. But that's just we don't know. We're never going to know, and that's the whole thing as well. So now for me as well, like the one thing I just like with what you said, it's like in terms of a religious person, that's what I like, the stuff that I like to hear you say. Yes, Genesis is complete. You know,
she would.
Not true. I know. And then, but what I think is the problem you have is you got.
No. I never said Genesis wasn't true.
And I was trying to catch you. Yeah.
I said you're misinterpreting what Genesis means.
Now this is the thing: interpretation. Everyone's interpretation is different, and you have people trying to go to others' interpretation.
When you interpret a text, particularly a sacred text, you've got to understand what were the writers trying to say. Now, for example, if you look at Genesis 1 and Genesis 2, there's two different accounts of creation side by side. They're actually quite different. In one of them, man comes first, and the other, the animals come first. They're quite different. You look at it, logically speaking, as scientific account, they're compatible. Yet the people who put Genesis together, which was done a long time ago, nearly 3,000 years ago, actually put those side by side. Now, if you're a scientist, you say, well, they must be idiots because they're not logically the same. But what was the author trying to say? What did those two accounts have in common? It wasn't the way it was done, which came first and when exactly it happened. What was in common is that God is the creator. And if you look back upon these texts and understand what they really meant to the people at the time and what they were trying to say and the point they were trying to make, it wasn't a scientific account at the beginning of the world. In fact, if they'd have known Charles Darwin's, I'm quite sure there would have been Genesis 3 and that would have gone in there too. And they would have said they're all the same. Because they're all about God as the ultimate creator. Okay, this account, man came first, this account, animals came first, this case there was a process of evolution, but God is the creator. That's the fundamental thing. So when you say Genesis isn't true, it's not true at all. Even the story of the ark of Noah, well, obviously it didn't happen because there's all sorts of genetic reasons. But the story of a good man who stands up to public pressure to do something to follow God, that's a true story, and it has some element of truth in it. Not literally, but as a story, it's a great one.
I think as a story, absolutely, it's one of the it's a modern wonder in terms of the story itself. But from my perception, it's just the story, and that's how it should be treated.
You're trying to read it as a scientific account.
No, I'm not. I'm not. Definitely not. I'm just saying you don't need to have all this stuff.
The people who put Genesis together weren't trying to say that. They weren't trying to write a scientific account. They were trying to help you to understand what God is like, and that's what matters. Because look, it doesn't give us stuff really. How long ago the world was created. What really counts is what's God telling us to do with our lives right now. Are we the kind of people that should take delight in people being ripped to death in the arena, or we should want to serve others and help them? That's what it means, and you understand that God matters a lot.
That's what it means to you, though. This is the thing. You have interpretations, and interpretations are spread various things.
Well, you asked what it meant to me, but
I understand.
But you started off by saying, Genesis is false, and I just said that's not correct. I don't believe. I believe the Bible is the Word of God, and I think it's the best possible. But you've got to understand the Bible in terms of the people who wrote it. And if you think, well, my assumption is that the person who wrote Genesis, which was actually a collection of accounts, was a 21st century rationalist with a scientific education. It makes no sense. Mm-hmm. But if you understand them and who they were, really who they were, and what they were trying to say in these words, it makes a great deal of sense.
Yeah, I don't think we can discount that, but I think it's time to move on from a lot of the stuff, and this is the point as well.
Well, that's what Hitler thought.
No.
You would agree with him completely.
No, not that at all.
You take away the ethical basis, the basis for ethics. You think you've got lovely, warm humanism. Well, no, it doesn't work.
It wasn't taking away the ethics for the land what it do. I'm nowhere near as good a debate as what people who can listen to this and watch this will absolutely. Jimmy's killing me. Understand? I'll forge you stuff from better people than me, called Christopher Hitchens and Lawrence Krauss, who can actually do it a lot better than what I can articulate.
Believe it or not, Joel, I have read these people. I have read Dawkins and the Blind Watchmaker and the Selfish Gene, and I'm very familiar with these kinds of arguments.
Yeah, and how do you find it? That's a good. I'm glad you segued into that. How did you find it?
I don't find it convincing at all, because basically he's talking about against literal.
Whereas I do, which is an interesting thing about people.
Yeah, I know, but you're talking about this business about whether Genesis is a literally scientifically accurate account of the creation of the world.
That was just more of a flippant comment. But for me, we fundamentally agree on a lot of things, but we don't agree on this origin sort of stuff.
Well, that's this whole discussion.
I know.
Of course we do. I have a scientific worldview as much as anybody.
I know.
I love science. I read science all the time. I subscribe to new science stuff. I devour anything about science. Love science. It's one of my passions. But I don't see any contradiction between science and God. Not in the least. And you've got to remember too, who was the single greatest scientist of all times? The first person ever. Now there's a lot of great names around. There's Darwin and there's Einstein and there's Hawking. Yeah. Oh no, come on.
Hawking.
No way.
Absolutely.
Galileo and Copernicus.
Newton.
But Newton was the man who, more than anybody else, actually put things together. Because before Newton, there was just a whole set of observations. Yeah. He made theories of the way things work that fitted together what goes on the Earth, what goes on in space. He put it together. He was the first great systematizer of science ever. And to my mind, never could you beat what he achieved. Because his model, and when I studied biohistory and did that and tried to apply science to history, he's my model. He's the person. He's the man I look to. What was Newton? He was a very, very fervent Christian.
Only game in town at the time, though.
No, it wasn't at all. No, you don't know history.
I don't know history.
No, you don't know history.
I don't know.
Because at that time, we're not talking about 13th century. We're talking about the late 17th century in England, okay?
Yep.
And that was chock full of people who you would have got on fine with. There were skeptics, atheists. There's a story about Newton, okay? In his laboratory, apparently, he had this incredibly beautiful model. I think it was of the solar system or something like that. It was all, it was gorgeously made and put together. And somebody came in. One of his atheist friends said to him, "Well, who made that?" And he said, "No, nobody made it." And he said, "No, come on. Somebody made it. Somebody must have made it. Look at it. It's incredible. It's beautiful. It's magnificent. Somebody made it." No, it just appeared. And the guy just kept on insisting that somebody must have made it. And then Newton said to him, "You cannot accept that something like this, which is a model of the universe, was made by nobody, and yet you insist that the universe itself, which is 1 billion times more amazing and more beautiful and more magnificent, was made by nothing and was never thought of by anybody." Okay? That was what Newton thought. And it wasn't because it was the only game in town. There was plenty of people who thought differently at that time.
There's a good book by Lawrence Krauss called A Universe from Nothing, which is a good one as well. I don't know if you've ever read that.
But you're asking about Newton.
Yeah.
Your statement that it was the only game in town is completely incorrect. He actually debated with the atheists.
Right.
He was convinced that God was behind it. So the idea that science and religion are somehow at opposite ends, Newton would not have agreed with you at all. And there's never been a greater scientist than him.
But why do you think Newton went with God as a scientist then?
I don't know what I've never spoken to Newton. I'd love to.
I know. I'm just trying to think. Well, for me, then, if you're saying that he added, because I would have thought he would have been the other. I don't know the history nowhere near as well as you, but I'm just saying, as a man, he was really brilliant. I know Newton gets brought up sometimes, but in regards to that, why don't you think he then come to this similar conclusion that, let's say, I have or many other people have?
Well, I can't speak for Newton. I can speak for myself. That I'm as scientifically minded as anybody, and I don't see the incompatibility, and nor did he.
Right.
In fact, to me, the universe speaks of the glory of God. I mean, really, what can you say?
Okay. Now, is there anything you want to leave this with? I know I've poked you enough. I reckon, hopefully, to keep my job still, but I've poked you enough, and I've probed you enough, and I think
I've never yet fired a person for being an atheist.
Well, not yet, anyway. But I think I've probed you enough, Jim. And obviously, from anyone who's watching or hearing this, Jim's a far stronger debater than what I am. And I'm just sort of sit back and listen, and you can watch that. And
well, maybe one day you'll listen. And
no, maybe the other way around.
Maybe it'll go.
No, maybe the other way around. You go, this science stuff, this is exactly right. I've no reason for it. Go back to your young Jim, 27 days, 26 years old. Go back to that.
Back to the bad old days.
But I think it was quite interesting, Jim. So thanks for that and revealing all that sort of stuff. And people who obviously are Christians, and I'm sure enjoyed that. And would if you do, I know Jim, you like talking about with Christians and stuff. I've seen it at training sometimes. We've had people when we did the Jim's Life stuff come up to you and introduce themselves, and they go from and they say, "Oh, we're Christians too," and all that sort of stuff. So
I always throw out a few clues in my talk.
You do?
I talk about going to church and stuff quite deliberately, not to try and make it overly religious, but just so that people who are genuine Christians come up. It's wonderful, actually. There's a brotherhood, a sisterhood there, so that when you meet somebody who's a Christian, you're immediately close. you have a common understanding, a common sense of ethics, a common idea about what life is about.
Yeah.
It's really wonderful. I love speaking to fellow Christians. It's amazing. You have this instant bond.
Yeah, same with me and Ricky Gervais as agnostics and atheists, the same thing. Get together, have a beer.
Actually, I love Ricky Gervais. I think he's one of my favourite, even though he's obviously somewhat different in his views. We were actually watching Invention of Lying last night. Of all subjects.
Well, there you go. Good time.
I just thought it's a hilariously funny movie. I don't accept what he says, of course.
That was a cheeky way to do it. It was very cheeky. It was a very clever way to do it and to make his argument very cheekily.
Oh, I love this. Like the thing on the bus, Pepsi for when you can't find Coke. I love that film. I must have seen it about 4 times.
There you go. So we'll leave it there for this week's edition, guys, and we'll be back for next week's edition. We're going to talk about fitness and health and exercise and all that sort of stuff with Jim. He's a very sprightly young age. I'm not going to say his age. You can have a guess for next week. So we'll talk about that. So thanks for that, Jim. Make sure you subscribe, and we'll see you tonight for anyone who's listening to this for the Wednesday 7 o'clock Ask Jim sessions as well. Thanks, Jim.
All right. Bye.